I was born to two pretty young parents. They didn't expect to be parents. I was born in Portland when my parents were 19 and 20. I think they got married while my mom was pregnant with me. Their marriage was pretty difficult. Neither of them had super helpful upbringings. My biological mom, she split time growing up between her mom, dad, and grandma, all three of which really despised each other, and all three of them would regularly talk bad about the others. And she grew up feeling pretty isolated as a single child. And my dad had a really difficult childhood. He went through a really tragic experience that his family didn't believe him about for a long time growing up. And his dad would really mistreat him and say really awful things about who he was and flick him on the head and call him a retard. I think he grew up with a lot of shame and just lies that being actively spoken about who he was and the kind of person he was, and that really affected him as he came into adulthood. They got divorced pretty young, but it was because of kind of one tragic situation where my dad had to make a snap decision when I think I was 1.5 or maybe 1. My dad brought us a few years after the divorce back down to Medford to live with his dad. By then it was just my brother, Derek, me, and my dad, and my mom stayed up in Portland. And we got, I think, to visit her a few times a year. But when I was 4, it's important to know that my dad started dating Danielle, who way later in my life ended up sort of taking me and adopting me as her son. But when I was 4, she was just my dad's girlfriend. On account of, I think, some of the things that my dad experienced growing up, he really suffered with bipolar disorder. I know it's also genetic, but I think that it definitely was affected by so many of the lies and wicked things that were told to him, and just the ways he was mistreated. And he turned to alcohol a lot of the times growing up to deal with that. Throughout growing up, there were a lot of crises that were caused by his inability to see the fact that he was mentally ill and his inability to take responsibility for that. When I was 15, my dad and Danielle split up, and my dad on my 15th birthday left my house, and it was the last time I saw him for a long time. That same summer, a situation happened with my mom, my biological mom, where we kind of stopped having a closer relationship, and my older brother moved up to Portland with her. And it was at that time that I didn't really have a relationship with either of my biological parents, and Danielle offered to let me stay with her and functionally became my mom at that point. Danielle isn't a Christian, but I don't think there's been any other person other than Jesus Christ himself who's shown me more self-sacrificial love than she did when she took me in and adopted me. And just like Christ did with my sin, took responsibility of something that she really didn't have to. She took me in, and it was her and my younger brother and me just living together and figuring out our new family. By the time I was 15, and I spent the rest of my high school years like that. It was a year or two after that I first started to consider Christianity. It's kind of a long and funny story that has more to do with me wanting friends than it does with some crazy, ecstatic, emotional experience of Christ. But I know that when I first became a Christian, it really was because I desperately wanted community, and I desperately wanted people to know me, and people who I really respected and loved and who I thought were actually intelligent were Christians. So even though I was a staunch atheist and really resented Christianity and thought Christians were very selfish people and really stupid people, these people like my math teacher, Russ Miller, and my best friend, Ben Hawkins, ended up being Christians. And when I learned about that, I wanted to talk with them and wanted to understand why they thought that. And over time, I just kind of was drawn in. I went to a Christmas Eve service and decided I wanted to be a Christian my junior year, and I was baptized the next summer. I didn't really have a home church, and because I'd never been Christian before, I just didn't even know what to look for. There was still a lot of sin and fear just embedded in my life that I think discipleship would have really helped with. If there would have been more instruction and discipline that was not really present in my life, I think that I could have avoided a lot of really intense sin. That's still my responsibility. Because of that, I had a few years where I was Christian, and I do think that Lord knew me in some capacity, but where I really struggled to live out a life that was affected by the grace that Jesus had shown me. The first time in my life where I really experienced a relationship with God and where he used his spirit to really speak to me was a season when I was walking in denial of the Christian identity I held. It was my freshman year of college, and I was extremely depressed Throughout all of high school, I'd suffered with mental illness and suffered from suicidal thoughts and self-harm and issues with eating. And those things were coming back up as I entered into college, and I turned to the world and sensuality to fill in me what I thought that I was missing. And it was in that time that I first started praying to God real prayers, but they were prayers about why he could let it feel like this and why I was so anxious and depressed and sad all the time and why it felt so painful. I've heard Christians later explain that this is because I actually did have the Spirit in me that was showing me that I was not living in a way that was actually pursuing a relationship with God, who was the only person who would really fill that hole in my heart. But I denied him for a long time and didn't walk in that truth. God did deliver me. There was a period of time where I just was coming to a low in terms of my life and the way those things were filling me. And Jesus really took hold of my heart and showed me by his Spirit, like, hey, Coi, you actually need to follow me. And loving me means following my commandments because they're actually what's best for you and what's best for the people around you. There was deliverance from sin slowly over time. But I think my story is one where I didn't just have an ecstatic emotional experience and become a Christian. By the biblical understanding of what a Christian looks like and does, I became a part of the church, and there was sort of like a mudslide from when I wanted to be a Christian to the Spirit working in me to when I actually became someone who understood the gospel and had a relationship with Jesus and understood what it meant to self-sacrificially love people. He's still been working that out in me ever since I actually gave those sinful desires to him. He's really been working those things out in me by his grace over time through discipleship and through relationships with Christians who explained to me what it means to follow him and gave me accountability. And the Spirit's used those people as well as the body of Christ in general to just create and be an actual new person that I couldn't have created after being saved and being baptized, but not having community or actual intentional discipleship. So I'm thankful very much for the way that God uses people to give the grace of the Spirit to people. I married my wife 8 months ago. Marriage has been so helpful in holding me accountable to that because there's so much anxiety and pain and self-protective response, just like I had in high school in the most intense ways, that's come back up. But I have this tangible person, Halen, who sees me every night. And if I respond in anger or frustration, and if I am anxious and self-protective in a way that keeps me from serving my wife as a good husband, she sees those things and I'm held accountable to that. And it shows me the way that I am and how it will affect another person. And the Spirit's been using that to just grow me in so many different ways of responding to the pain from the people that, or the pain I've experienced because of other people and the decisions they've made. I don't feel like a victim to that. I actually just feel like the Spirit's working on me and helping me self-sacrificially love other people. And the big thing the Lord's doing in my life right now is helping me to actually not slander the people who have sinned against me and not slander my family, but come to an understanding that it is not because I am great, but just because of his mercy that I'm not addicted to drugs in a ditch, or that I didn't throw my life away, and or that I didn't take my own life. It's not by my own strength. It's by both the common grace of just self-sacrificial love through family members who don't even know Christ, and through his working of just showing me that the reason I can be peaceful and the reason that I can give away everything I have to other people and self-sacrificially love them, even family members who've hurt me, even my spouse who I can have an argument with, even friends when they're not meeting all of my insecure emotional needs. The reason that I can serve those people is because Christ has done everything for me and he splayed it out for me on the cross. What the Lord's doing in my life right now has a lot to do with moving away from how the world would respond to some of the things that I've gone through. The most amazing grace he's given me is a relationship with him and an ability to be delivered from my sin and my inability to submit to him. But a lot of what he's doing now is showing me that it's not just sinful to not follow commandments, but it's just as bad in my own heart to hold other people, even my family members, to a standard that I was not held to. What Jesus has invited me into that no other person or idea or philosophy has ever offered to me is not just the ability to forgive like a huffy child who has to say they're sorry because their mom said so, but a real ability to let go of the debts other people owe us, because everything that we had was forgiven by Christ. As I've struggled recently to be forgiving in my heart towards people who I really feel like have wronged me or done wrong to me and had expectations as to how they should have treated me that they didn't meet or satisfy, I close my eyes and I think about the cross where I was Jesus' enemy and he took my sin and my death for me. And his Spirit whispers to me that I can do the same thing for every person who's done wrong to me because I have nothing else that I need from them. It's really important to know that it's not wrong or unnatural to feel hurt and disappointment and maybe even reactions of resentment and anger and frustration towards the people who have been hurtful to us in our lives. We shouldn't rejoice or be happy that we've been abandoned or mistreated by the people who are supposed to love us. And the call as a Christian is not to neglect those emotional responses. But as Jesus taught us to pray in the Sermon on the Mount, when we ask God for forgiveness, we have to say, forgive us as we have forgiven others. And so it's essential for us as people who have been forgiven to move towards those who've hurt us in the same forgiveness that our Savior had when he forgave us. So I guess most of my life has been Jesus working hard to show me that he wants to forgive me. And now for the first time, he's showing me that that can't just end with me. It has to come from him and extend past me to those who have wronged me. And that I can't keep that forgiveness for myself. I'm Coi Holloway, and this is my story.